in going through life, there's been people that have made statements that have stuck with me. And one of my favorite ones is from Al Leman, would always say, we're all prisoners of our experiences, right? And of course, that was kind of prefaced by when I grew up in Wisconsin, all the males that influenced me were pretty hardcore. And so if we were ever whining about something, the statement was, what do you want, egg in your beer? And so there are statements. And one of the statements I think that has all stuck with me, there's a fellow at University of Illinois, Bob Easter, who was a nutrition professor and now is kind of an administrator in the university, came in and was one of the speakers for our EVP class, and this would have been we were the second class, 93 to 95. And a statement that he made that has always stuck with me is that, when you're researching a topic or going to write a paper or whatever, always go to the oracle. And the concept is okay, don't get hung out to dry because you didn't do your homework to understand what people have already written already. And even in our organization, there's, ahead of a meeting, how many people actually go in there and do a literature search to find out what's going on. Even in a session like this, who is actually up on the literature and that sort of thing. And I've been in many conversations where I'll sit there and Google on my smartphone. There's questions that come up, and we don't know what that is, and within 15 seconds I can have the answer. And so that's really the nice thing about the web and the web surfing and all that kind of stuff, is that there's a lot of information readily available. Now the flip side of that is that sometimes we kind of get overwhelmed. So just to kind of, so as we go through the talk today, some of it's going to be kind of philosophical and process related, and then I'll kind of go through the different databases that I typically work with. And so, why or what situations, something new. This is kind of a little bit what's on my plate right now. So sapovirus is an example of a virus that we're encountering a little bit in the field. Sometimes it's something old, but maybe not. So parvovirus 1, but now 2. And so as we try to understand that relationship, push versus pull. And so what I mean by that is it's kind of like a marketing sort of view. But to me, the push is when information is pushed to you, whether that's a magazine, an email, letter, so on and so forth. And we'll go through PubMed and how you can have abstracts and things like that pushed to you. The real problem with that is that very few of us, even of those that have a tech service job like me, where we don't have the demands on our time like you guys do as practitioners, even for people like us, it's difficult to spend a lot of time kind of doing general reading. Even if we can do that and watch football at the same time, or even do that and listen to Fox News at night like I do at the same time. And in fact, the other night after the Repro conference, several of us went out to dinner, and Mike Dick, who's a professor at University of Alberta, we kind of got into this topic about how do you keep up with the literature. And even most university professors don't do that themselves. They have grad students that do that. Even in our group this last summer, as we were getting into trying to understand the nutraceutical area, we hired a graduate student as an intern to help us with that. The flip side of that is we can pull information off the web so readily, then the question is, do we really need to know anything up front? Because it's right there. And so, but there again, you have to be kind of efficient at that, and you still have to have a little bit of curiosity and skills to get that done efficiently. And then in many respects, who's going to be the expert? And we have all this information out there, but at a certain point in time, you have to talk to somebody that is kind of an expert in that area. And sometimes the people that we think are the experts may not necessarily be the experts, simply because we haven't gone into the literature to try and understand who really is the expert. Okay, and then the kind of the next part is, okay, what's the purpose? And kind of with the concept of beginning with the end in mind, what's the output or deliverable? And then what's the audience? And so as we communicate, many times verbally, could be a group presentation, whether it's a production meeting or a meeting like this, a written report to a customer within the context of ABVP certification. One of the requirements for that is doing a case report. And so I thought everybody cross their fingers to see if I can get this to work. Maybe not. So I pulled a couple of them off that of case reports. Okay, so these are from JSHAP. One is by Dave Madsen, who I think most of you guys know. This was a case report he submitted for his credentials, for getting his boards. I think I can just do this and bring up Jeremy's. So Dave's was kind of confined to that case. Jeremy's was also based on a case, but then he was doing a master's degree at the same time, so there's a lot more information in there. But to me, this is kind of the ultimate sort of way to present your data and use that as kind of a reference for that. But that is part of the process. And let's see. Okay, so then the level of detail in terms of the content and then also the referencing. And so, sometimes people want to know more or they want to know where to be directed to get more information. So including the reference sometimes can be valuable in that regard. And then the strategies or objectives, the question to address. Again, because of the plethora of information, sometimes the real challenge is just to narrow your scope so the search is efficient. However, you still got to be ready for the known or the novel, and whether you act on that or do something with it at the time or kind of put it in your back pocket. What's the information needed? Results in interpretation. So for a general knowledge sort of thing, it might be simply a matter of reading the abstract from a paper, which the abstracts are always publicly available. The materials and methods would have to be part of the paper. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's more of a process thing. So unless you're doing research in that area, you probably don't really care about the materials and methods that much. And then some journals, like JSHAP, for example, they have kind of a summary at the end that is also very important. Again, who's doing what and who is the expert. And so part of that is probably the bias of my age. And so when you've been at this for 40 years, Tony, sometimes it's more like who is doing it than what they're doing, because we have experiences with those people or they're grad students or whatever. And that makes a difference in terms of how we interpret that data. Now, the other thing that we look at, and increasingly, there's you can read a lot of papers and whatever that they all have different qualities, and they're all relatively more or less subjective or objective. And personally, I don't really have a problem with that as long as it's apparent how for me to interpret that. I think sometimes we really get hung up on every information has got to be objective and so on and so forth, and sometimes that just puts blinders on what we need to be doing. And again, that's a little bit of the old practitioner in me that sometimes we got to go do something even though we don't have the complete answer. We just got to pull the trigger, and then it's up to us to make sure that what we did is done correctly. But when you look at any kind of experiment or paper, there's basically two ways that we want to evaluate it. One is the experiment valid, and was it done correctly? And then more importantly, many times, is it really applicable to our situation? Does it fit my situation? Can I really utilize that? And so from an experimental validity standpoint, there's a group of people that have developed what's called the REFLECT statement, and it's for reporting randomized controlled trials in livestock and food safety. The champion of that, at least in my mind, and Jeremy, you probably have some opinion, is Annette O'Connor, who's an epidemiologist at Iowa State. And if you want to get the REFLECT statement, I'll show it to you here, but just Google REFLECT statement definition and it'll come right up. There's 22 different items that are addressed, and hopefully that'll come up here. Okay, and I'm not going to go through the 22 items, but it goes through the introduction, the background, materials and methods. A lot of it has to do with how the experimental units, the animals or pens or whatever, were randomized to treatment. That's probably one of the bigger problems in studies, or what is the experimental unit. And so when you have one barn on one treatment and another barn on another treatment, the pig isn't the experimental unit, the pen isn't the experimental unit, the barn is. And so you basically have a study with one treatment per group. So if you want to get this, it's pretty easy to do that. Just Google reflect statement definition and you'll be there. So, and then like I said, the other thing is that having done research over a number of years, I can tell you that I have never done an experiment where everything went perfectly. And people that tell you that everything went perfectly, they're lying, okay? Or they're overlooking the little things that happen in an experiment. And then it's up to the investigator to decide how to handle that and so on and so forth. But that's kind of the reality of that. So search options, so this is kind of what I do, okay? And so why do I get involved in this? Well, I do a lot of our field research. I kind of liaison with our R&D group. I get involved with our lawyers because they have questions about patents and patent protection and so on and so forth, generating new ideas, trying to figure out who we should be looking at to cooperate on things and so on and so forth. So Google is a good starting point. I think there's other search engines. I used to be a big Yahoo fan, but I quit doing that several years ago. And with Google, I assume everybody knows how to use Google, okay? The big question to get into is what do you type in? And in some respects, if you type in a fairly detailed statement, you'll get a fairly detailed output. But many times you don't want to take the time to do that, so you type in a couple of terms and then go from there. What I find amazingly is sometimes I'll put in a couple words and then it'll add 2 or 3 more words that put more definition into it and narrow the search. So it's an iterative process. And so again, kind of just to demonstrate this a little bit, does anybody want to Google a specific topic today? Anybody? Nobody? Okay, so I'm going to do sapovirus. Okay, just sapovirus. Now what you're going to find out, well, that wasn't a very good term because what comes up first? Human. Okay, so I'm going to add swine to that. And I did this ahead of time, so I'm not doing this cold. But okay, so now I get porcine saprovirus. And the other thing is that, again, as you kind of do this web surfing, you come across things that you may not know about or ignored or whatever. And so the first thing that comes up is the porcine saprovirus bulletin from Jim Roth's group at Iowa State, the Center for Food Security. And how many of you are familiar with that set of documents? Have you? Okay. So any kind of novel virus, they got them all. There's like 20-some different kind of white papers in there. So it's a very good source. So, and I know in the previous session they talked about porcine parvovirus type 2. It's always nerve-wracking to type in front of other people. Okay. And this is a little bit where, again, the concept of, who's doing what, okay? And so, again, as you look at these, that's, different, you can see Tanya Presnick's name there. Let's open this one up. One of these was from, this is from Iowa State, Roslyn, so on and so forth. But you get an idea of who's doing what and so on and so forth. And then for most time for practitioner, you're trying to look for that paper that kind of gives you some general information, not necessarily all as a literature review, but one that kind of updates you on things that are going on. Okay, any questions on, everybody comfortable with that? Okay, so in the medical field, we have a search engine called PubMed. I think most people have heard of that or are familiar with it. It's basically refereed publications. There's 30,000 journals. Right now, based on what they said on their website, there's 30 million citations, 30 million papers in there. And we'll go into it in a minute. But with PubMed, and as I said before, the abstracts of papers and the citation, that is public domain information. What is not necessarily public domain information is the paper itself. And so, depending on the journal, it may or may not be free. And so, if you're not like with Merck, we have Merck Library. And so our company subscribes to a number of journals. Every once in a while there will be a journal that we don't subscribe to, and then they got to pay extra for that. But if you're not subscribed to that, then there's some articles you may have to pay for. Sometimes that you pay a set fee to have it. Sometimes it's, you can use it for 48 hours or something like that. And again, if sometimes the question is, well, is it a journal that I want to know about, like Animal Science? Is that in Journal of Animal Science? Is that in PubMed? Well, you just search Journal of Animal Science and you'll find out that it is. And again, getting back to this push or pull concept, and you'll notice that when I do a lot of web stuff, I don't have favorites. I just use Google. And so that's, and so for me, I'm signed in, but you can create an account. It's free. And so this is me. And then I've got some information in here. You can't see my password. I will not tell you what my first dog was. But I'm curious because I think her name was Lady, and that's 4 letters, and I see more than 4 things up there. So I don't know what that is, okay? We'll have to figure that out later. And then as I go into, this is my area here, okay? And so, can everybody see this? Yeah, I'm going to sit down because otherwise I can't see what I'm doing. But so if I want to search for something, okay, and let's just do sapovirus swine. I told you. Okay, we're going to come up with 85 papers. And the way I'm showing it, I don't show the abstract, it's just a citation. I can click on it and show the whole abstract, okay? And then if I want to save this, and this is kind of the important part of it, let's say I want to save these first 2. I click on those. Okay, now some of these websites aren't very intuitive, right? So you think there would be like a save to or something, but it's a send to. Okay, and if I want to save it like to a text file or a Word or something like that, I save it to a file. Whoops. Okay, and then what do I want? Well, I want the whole abstract. And then I create a file like that. And then let's just open that up. Now, how many of you know how to do this already? Okay, so that's good. So, I mean, I don't want to bore you, but these are the kind of things that when I started working with this kind of stuff that used to just frustrate the hell out of me because if you don't do it very often, okay, so on and so forth. And so you can see that that's kind of that process. And then I can save this, I can save it into Word or, however I want to save that. So this is what I would do if I was going to pull some information, kind of a one-time sort of deal type of thing. Now the other part of this is the concept of kind of pushing stuff to yourself. How many of you have articles from PubMed pushed to you periodically? Anybody? Okay. So what I can do for sapovirus swine is, would you like email updates of new search results? Yes. How often? There's my email address. I can change that if I want. How often do I want it? Which day of the month do I want it? Now, there are some things for me, like circovirus and myco, I want it weekly. Okay. Some things not so often. The problem a little bit sometimes, and I need to make some changes to mine, if you go to monthly, sometimes there's too many articles, and so let's say there's 20 articles in a month, and you have it set up to only get 5 at a time. You'll get the 5, and then the other 15 won't be there. So then either change how many you get or go to more frequent. What do I want? I want the abstract, although actually I usually just get the summary, because otherwise your emails are big. Send at most, how many items? I've got some options there. And anything else, and then I'm going to save this. Okay? So that sounds really cool, right? I can do this, but I used to just do Circo and Myco, and then I started doing PERS. There's just too damn many PERS papers that get pushed to you, and then a bunch of other stuff. And we have one of the fellows in our group, Canadian Tech Service Vet, Francisco DeGraw, does this for our group. And then for certain papers, he'll download the papers and send those as well. So that's kind of for me, the nuts and bolts of how to use PubMed. Any questions, or anybody have any comments or different things they do? Because I'm just showing you the way I do it, and I'm not necessarily an expert in this sort of thing. So any questions? Or okay, so let's keep moving here. I only have 10 slides, Jeremy. That's pretty good for me. Yeah. So that's the main one. And then the other one is ASV. I think we're probably more aware of what goes on in the ASV with the swine library and the video library and all that sort of thing. So I'm not going to get into that. I have a little bit of complaint. Their search engine sometimes is not the easiest to use, especially when you Google a topic that has a large number of citations in there. It gets very hard to sort through that. ASV did have an agreement or a contract with Texas A&M University to use the library. How many people have used that? Okay. I never used it because I got Merck Library, right? But so I called them last week to find out what the status was of that, and unfortunately that's going away. And apparently, when they set this up, they set it up with a couple of other species groups. And apparently there was a few people that abused the system. And within a library, the way you abuse the system is ask for a bunch of papers that they don't have subscriptions for. And then they got to go through and pull them out. So that's kind of unfortunately went away. Another one that sometimes has some interesting stuff in it is the DCPHM. Anybody access this one? Okay, European College of Health, and so there's a lot of good information in there. Again, it's kind of one of those with both ASV and with these sorts of things. It's a pull sort of thing. There's no way that it's really pushed to you for the most part. Some of it you'll find in e-newsletters, but some not. And then just a couple more. Again, kind of in my world, from a research standpoint, sometimes I want to know who's doing what at universities, and so there's a system, or in federal government labs like NEDC or so on and so forth, and so it's called CRIS, Current Research Information System. It's USDA. I got the wrong website in there, but just Google CRIS USDA, and basically what that does is tell you. If a researcher is getting federal money from USDA, they have to create a CRIS project. And then they have to, in that CRIS report then, we'll have a summary of the grant proposal along with some benchmarks and if there's publications, it'll list those citations. It sometimes has the amount of money that's spent and so on and so forth. And then the last one, and this is my last slide, is sometimes in the patents, and patent reading can sometimes be very fascinating. It takes, some of them are very long and cumbersome, but you'll discover some very interesting things in that regard as well. So that's all I have. Any questions or comments or any kind of tricks? Anybody want to add to that? Or I don't know if this is what you wanted, Jeremy, but that's basically, it's kind of one of those things that you just got to get in there and do it, But it's not with PubMed. I mean, when I was a student at the University of Minnesota and a graduate student, we had to go to the library and read through like Pig News and Information or Commonwealth Agricultural Bureau and all that kind of stuff. Now it would take, half a day. It takes 5 minutes to have the same information. You still got to read it, but you don't have near the retrieval time. So.